last time we were doing the supernormal eightfold way, and we went through the first 5. So we have to go start from the 6th, the harmonious exercise. Now, when we get into proper meditation, mainly we have to go through this harmonious exercise. Now, this harmonious exercise is a way of purifying the mind. And in purifying the mind, there are 4 steps to be taken. The first 2 steps will purify the mind to a certain extent. We can even reach what is called the first jhana, or the first ecstasy. Now I explain, I think, the meaning of the word ecstasy. Ecstasy means standing out. Stasi means standing. Ecstasy means standing out. Now what this means is, we are standing out of the sensual sphere. The sensual sphere. Now what we mean by the sensual sphere means we are attracted to pleasant sensations, we are repelled by the unpleasant sensations. Now that attraction and repulsion disappears when we stand out. Now standing out means we have come out of the sensual sphere. Now this means that our mind is not dominated by emotions. The emotional excitements, agitations, worries, anxieties, fears, all these things disappear when you enter the first jhana. So you are out of the sensual sphere. Now if you die when you are in that state, you will be reborn in the Brahma world. Because in the Brahma world, there is no sensual pleasure. The Brahma world is a place where there is happiness but no pleasure. So we have to distinguish between pleasure and happiness. Happiness is a state of mind which is calm, tranquil, free from disturbances. That is happiness. Pleasure is stimulation of the senses and excitement. Pleasure is an excitement, whereas happiness is a tranquil state of the mind. This is the difference. Now when we think of purifying the mind, we have to understand that the mind in its original state is pure. just like water. Water in its original state is pure. Water is a pure substance. Now most of us know that water is called H2O. What does that mean? It means a molecule of water contains 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. H2O. H means the hydrogen, O means the oxygen. So as hydrogen oxide, that is water, and it is a pure substance. The water becomes polluted due to foreign matter falling into the water. So in the same way, what we call the mind is pure in its original state. All impurities come from outside and it gets polluted due to something foreign entering the mind. That is how the Buddha saw it. And it is because of this that the mind can be purified by removing all the dirt from the mind. It can be purified, like water can be purified by taking all the dirt out, and even by what is called distillation. But still, a pure water can never be found in the normal state. Normally, water is always found impure. So in the same way, the mind is normally impure because dirt has already fallen into the mind. But it can be purified if we use the right method. This is the important thing to understand. Now, in early, when Western psychology was gradually evolving or developing, it was people like Sigmund Freud who studied the mind, and he also realized the problems created by emotions, and he wanted to get rid of the emotions, but he didn't find a way to get rid of the emotions because he assumed that emotions are built into our system, and therefore emotions cannot be eliminated because we have certain organs in the body that when activated, emotions arise. And so he thought the mind can never be purified. The only thing that we could do is to express the emotions in a socially acceptable way. Instead of harming society, to express the emotions in a socially acceptable way. And that is what he calls sublimation. But the problem is, still the emotions are there, and that is why he pointed out in a book which he wrote, the title of that book was Civilization and its Discontent. That means if we express the emotions in a socially acceptable way, that is what is called being civilized. And if you are civilized, you will be discontented, unhappy. Because to be civilized is to control your desires and hatreds. Now, even if you become angry, you should not be speaking bad words. If you are civilized, you should not try to fight and quarrel. So to be civilized is to control your emotions, and that means you can't express your anger. And this not expressing the anger can create problems. And this is why today people talk about a thing called stress. And that stress means you have not expressed your anger or your desires for pleasure. So that means you are going to be unhappy people. Being civilized is to be unhappy. And this is the problem of stress. So Freud could not solve the problem fully, although he wanted to solve it. He couldn't find a solution because he thought these emotions cannot be totally eliminated. So this is something very important to understand. And so a very important thing happened as psychologists went on trying to understand emotions. People began to realize there is a way to gain control over emotions. Because when they studied how an emotion is aroused, that there is a reaction that occurs. To understand that, we have to understand that we, although we think of ourselves as human beings, we are also animals. And as animals, we are organisms. That means our body is an organism. An organism means our body is like a machine. And whatever is going on in the body is due to the natural laws that govern a machine. We have 5 senses, and these 5 senses can be stimulated by the environment. Light falling on the eye, sounds coming to the ears, smells coming to the nose, taste coming to the tongue, and the touch coming to the body. So the environment stimulates the organism through the senses, and the organism reacts to these senses. And this reaction, which I have explained earlier, is a chain reaction. The first part of the reaction is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. That is what is called perception. So perception is simply the reaction of the organism to sensory stimulation by the environment. Now, that reaction doesn't end there. Now, all the results of this reaction, which is seeing, is the result of the reaction of the eye. Hearing is the result of the reaction of the ear. Like that. Different reactions that occur are sent to the brain through the nerves that carry the message, like telephone wires that carry the message to the brain. And the brain begins to think about what was seen or heard or smelt or tasted or touched. And gives a meaning to what was perceived through the senses. Now that is the second thing that happens. First was the perception. The second is what we may call a conception, an idea, which is the interpretation, giving meaning to what was seen, heard, smelled, tasted, touched. Now it doesn't end there. Once the meaning has been given, according to the meaning that you give, an emotional reaction occurs. The emotional reaction means that a message goes from the brain to a gland, and the gland secretes a hormone into the blood, and the blood carries this hormone to the whole body, and changes take place in the body. And these changes means the body gets ready to act. And that means every emotion that is aroused creates tension in the body. And this tension has to be released, just like pulling a bow, the string of the bow. Once it is pulled, it wants to return. And if you release the string, then it goes back, and if there is an arrow fixed on the string, then the arrow will fly out. So in a similar way, the tension, once it has occurred, it needs to be released. And so, to release the tension is to act, to obtain what you desire, to get rid of what you hate, or to run away from what you fear. Or if it is a kind of worry, you may be expressing that by crying or lamenting. Now all that is the action part, which follows the emotional excitement or the emotional arousal. So there are really 4 stages in this reaction. First is perception, then comes conception, which we call cognition. And with the cognition comes the emotion that is aroused. And the emotional arousal is followed by action, which is the release of tension. Now this action itself can have results, consequences. Now if you are angry and you try to fight and quarrel and even it can lead to bad consequences. That means if you quarrel with other people also will want to quarrel with you. Or if you kill someone, maybe other people will try to do something and maybe you'll be taken to court. Or it may be. Or it may be that you will be creating a lot of problems this way. So the important thing is, this is what the Buddha called suffering or dukkha, which is normally translated as suffering. But this emotional reaction is what Sigmund Freud also wanted to put a stop to, but he couldn't find the way. Now a new school of psychology came up, which is called cognitive psychology. And it is this cognitive psychologists who began to say, if we interpret our circumstances in a different way, the emotion will not be aroused. So by learning to change our interpretation, we can get rid of the emotional arousal. Now this is something that the Buddha spoke about more than 2,500 years ago. Long before the Westerners came to recognize this fact. But even then, even after these cognitive psychologists began to discover this, still there are psychologists and so many scientists still thinking that emotion is important for our life and that emotion must be there. Now some people say, if we don't have emotions and if we only reason out things, we'll be like Mr. Spock. You know who that is? On Star Trek. If you have seen that movie about Star Trek, you know who Mr. Spock is. So, there are some people who say that. And but it was the Buddha who got rid of all emotions and taught how to get rid of all emotions. But he didn't behave like Mr. Spock because he was also a person who practiced what is called metta, karuna, mudita and upekkha. It's important to know that metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha are not emotions. Metta is possible only in the absence of emotions. Because all emotions are self-centered. There are no emotions that are not self-centered. So all the self-centered emotions, when eradicated, that is the time when people can be interested in the welfare of others for their sake, not for one's own sake. Now most people, when they talk about love, they are talking about love for one's own sake. You see, this is why a psychologist by the name of Erich Fromm wrote a book called The Art of Loving, where he pointed out that the word love in English is misleading because love is used for sexuality today. They call it making love. You see, that is sexual intercourse or whatever you call it. That is called making love. And so he said, he used 3 Greek words to refer to these different meanings of love. That sexual love between a man and woman, he called eros. Eros is a Greek word. And then there is also love between parents and children, or brothers and sisters, and that sort of love is called philia, family love. And then there is also another kind of love when I think Jesus was talking about love thy neighbor as thyself. That is an unselfish kind of love. And that is what he called agape. So all this means that all these good states of mind, metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, refer to a state of mind that is free of self-centered emotions. There are no other emotions other than self-centered emotions. It is the absence of self-centered emotions that makes it possible for there to be the true love, which is metta, a concern for the welfare of all beings without exception. And karuna, I have explained, was the depth dimension of metta, which is to what extent are you interested in the welfare of others? That is karuna. Where the distinction between oneself and others disappear. That is karma. And when that happens, all self-centered emotions disappear. Instead of thinking I and you, people begin to think in terms of we, all beings. And when that happens, all unhappiness disappears. Because all unhappiness is self-centered. And when the self-centered unhappiness disappears, you become happy. And that happiness of selflessness is what is called mudita. That is important to understand. And this happiness is not an excitement. It is a tranquil state of the mind. And with this tranquility of mind, the mind is not focused outside, it is focused inside. The mind being focused inside is what is called upekkha. Upa means inside, ikkati means to see what is inside. That is the mind being focused inside, which could be called introspection. Seeing what is inside. So, that is what the Buddha achieved. And it is by getting rid of emotions. Now it is in order to get rid of these self-centered emotions that we practice this thing called the harmonious exercise. So the harmonious exercise has 4 parts. The 4 parts means it's like this room. If we want to clean this room, to first thing, what is the first thing that we should do?
Close the door.
Huh? Close the door, that's right. Because all dirt can come only through the doors or windows. So we have, first thing is to close the doors and windows. And the next thing is what? To sweep it out. All the dirt should be swept out. Or maybe we can use, what do you call that thing?
Vacuum.
Huh?
Vacuum.
Vacuum. Vacuum cleaner. We have to take all the dirt out this way. So in a similar way, how do we deal with the mind? We have to understand what are the doors through which the bad thoughts come in. That is the five senses: eyes, ears, nose, tongue. So therefore, in order to stop this emotions coming in, what we do is called guarding the senses. Guarding the senses means when we see something, we have to stop thinking about how pleasant it is or how unpleasant it is. Not to dwell on the pleasantness or the unpleasantness. So that's the important thing. So, this is something that is very difficult to be practiced in the normal household life or the lay life. This is very important to understand. Of course, a person who wants to do it can do it. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. Because the normal person is always looking for pleasure and wanting to look at beautiful things, look at or hear beautiful sounds. We call it music, and pleasant smells. We use perfumes and pleasant tastes in the food and pleasant touches. So all these things are very difficult in the normal, what is called the secular life. The secular life. This is almost impossible. This is why if you want to practice this, you have to get into a retreat where you begin to observe at least the 8 precepts. The meaning of the 8 precepts is that where we determine that we are not going to please our senses. At least for a short period we can try it out. So that is what is left for the householder to do. At least spend a kind of vacation where you are observing the 8 precepts. That's the vacation. 8 precept vacation. That is how we can do it. But that will be helpful when you think of samsara, where we are going to be reborn again. So maybe in the next birth, you might want to become a monk or a nun. And then you can make it your lifetime work. And if you can't do that, at least you can start the retreat again. So till you come to the level when you will be able to make this your lifetime. So, but because we are now talking about how to purify the mind, we have to understand that purifying the mind first thing is to guard the senses. And the next step is, even if we guard the senses, the mind can become polluted. Why is that? Memories come into our mind. That means what happened yesterday or day before or month ago or even a year ago can come into the mind. And when that happens, the emotions are aroused again. So therefore, the second step is to learn to take our attention away even from pleasant memories or unpleasant memories. That is the second step. So, if we can do this properly, these two steps, guarding the senses and taking the attention away from memories, we can purify the mind to a great extent and even enter the first ecstasy, the jhanas. But the problem is, even if we enter the first jhana, our mind can get polluted again if we don't guard the senses and if we don't take our attention away from memories. So therefore, we have to come to a point of purity where we will never return to the emotional, sensual world. How can we do that? That is where we get into the next step called cultivation. What do we cultivate? Now some people call this mindfulness. But what we are cultivating is not just mindfulness. That's why I don't use that word mindfulness. The word that the Buddha used was sati or satipatthana. Sati means attention. Satipatthana means, it's coming from sati upatthana. Upa means inside. Thana means to place. That means having withdrawn your attention from what you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or even the memories, now you begin to focus your attention on what is going on inside you. That is introspection or introversion of attention. That introversion of attention is satipatthana. So what we call satipatthana is the introversion of attention. It's very important to understand. Keep our attention introverted, because if we begin to focus our attention on what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, the desires arise and then the mind is polluted. So to keep the mind in the proper pure state, we have to keep our mind inside instead of outside. And when we do that, what happens? We become aware of the reaction. Instead of focusing on the objects to which we react, we focus our attention on the reaction. So when we keep our mind inwards, the reaction first is seen as something that happens to the body. Whenever you see something, something happens to the body. Maybe your muscles in the body becomes tensed, or maybe your heart begins to beat faster, or maybe your breathing becomes heavier. That kind of change that is occurring in the body, you become aware of. Now when you see that change in the body, we begin to see the reaction as a physical change in the body. And then you also begin to feel something in the body, a comfort or discomfort. The emotion is always producing a discomfort because of the tension that is aroused in the body. The tension makes you uncomfortable. Now, if you have not been following the retreats, and if you have not followed those exercises, relaxation exercises, you don't know exactly what we mean by relaxation. So when you practice those exercises, you begin to understand what is meant by relaxation. So when you are aware of any tensions occurring, then you become aware of how your reaction makes you uncomfortable due to tensions in the body. Every time there is a reaction, you observe it as a feeling in the body. Then the next stage is you become aware of the emotion. Now, normally when you become angry, you are aware of anger. But here you begin to become aware of the anger even when it comes in a very subtle form. Normally you are not aware of that anger in the subtle form. And you are not even aware of how you identify the emotion. So as you become more and more aware of your reaction, you begin to become aware of the anger even in subtle forms, or maybe a desire coming up in a subtle form, or a fear coming up in a subtle form, or a worry coming up in a subtle form. So you begin to become aware of that. And then the next step is to become aware of the thought that started the emotional arousal. The thought that started the emotional arousal, that is what is called Dhammanupassana. Now we know Kayanupassana means to become aware of the physical manifestation of the reaction. Vedananupassana refers to the feeling in the body as you become emotionally aroused. And then you begin to identify the emotion, whether it is anger or a desire or a fear or worry, whatever it is. And then you become aware of the thought that started this emotional arousal. That is what is called Dhammanupassana. And once you have become aware of the thought that started the emotion, that is called Dhamma Vichaya. Dhamma Vichaya. That means you become aware that the thought is what started the emotion. And the moment you become aware of the thought properly, you begin to see that it is only a thought, not a reality. Normally our thoughts are taken as realities. But when you see the thought as a thought, the value of the thought disappears. And the power of the thought disappears. The thought is not powerful anymore to produce the emotion. Now that means what happens? The reaction stops. You have become conscious of the reaction that is going on unconsciously. When you become conscious of the reaction that is going on unconsciously, the unconscious reaction stops. And that means the thinking part has become powerful enough to stop the emotion. This is what we can call willpower. Now some people think we are born with willpower. But here we are pointing out we are not born with willpower. Willpower is something to be cultivated. So it is by cultivating the mind that the real willpower comes into being. And with this willpower, the mind gets purified fully so that it can never be polluted again. And when that happens, you begin to feel happy. The happiness is simply due to the absence of emotional disturbances. Emotion is a disturbance of the body as well as the mind. Now that emotional disturbance disappears. That is what has happened. When the emotional disturbance disappears, you become happy as a result. And with the happiness, which is called mudita, piti, the happiness which is called piti, and how do we translate the word piti?
Rapture.
Huh? Rapture, that's right, rapture. I use this word rapture because people who talk about these mystical states, they use that word rapture. It's not the normal kind of happiness. So when we use a special word like rapture, then people will not try to get mixed up with the normal happiness. This is not a normal happiness. This is a happiness due to the absence of self-centered emotions. And with that happiness, which is rapture, the body relaxes. Because the emotion, when they are excited, there is tension in the body. So when the emotions are absent, the body relaxes. And that relaxation of body is called Passati. That's right. So the Passati is the relaxation of the body. Now the Buddha says, Piti manas kayam passambati. When the thinking mind experiences this rapture, the body relaxes. Kaya means the body. Passambati means relaxing. When the mind is happy in the proper way, which is due to the purity of mind, the body relaxes. And passadda kayo sukham vedyati. When the body is relaxed, you feel comfortable. It is like when you take a bath, you feel comfortable because the tensions are relaxed. When the body is relaxed in this way, you begin to feel comfortable. So that comfort of this person who enters this state is always comfortable because this comfort is due to the purity of mind. So you don't, even if you don't bathe, you will be comfortable. You don't have to take a bath to feel comfortable. So you see, the happiness and the comfort is there. And therefore, when the body is relaxed, the next step is samadhi. Samadhi means the perfect tranquility of mind, the perfect stillness of the mind. The mind is not disturbed anymore. And when the mind is not disturbed, we are in the first jhana. And this is a jhana that you don't come out of, because you are completely out of the emotional sphere. That is the ecstasy. You are standing out of the emotional experience. And then you also enter the second jhana, the third jhana, and the fourth jhana. And when you enter the fourth jhana, there is upekkha. Upekkha means your mind is introverted and it stays introverted. That is the fourth jhana. That means you are not only introverted, you are also seeing what is inside. And what do you see? What is inside? What you normally see, what is inside, is not anything other than the process of perception itself. What the mind, I told you, mind is an activity, and that activity is simply perception. So you begin to become aware of the process of perception, and that is what is called, normally called the five aggregates. but what I call the 5 collections or accumulations or cumulatives. So we have created the new word, cumulative. And so this is, for want of a word. And why this is called cumulative is because these are activities that are going on all the time. Every second, it is a new activity. So what we really see is like a movie, which is a collection of still pictures moving at a fast rate. So this process of perception is a series of thoughts or activities which we call thinking. And this activity is going on like a movie all the time. And so, this is what we call the cumulatives. It's a series of activities which are going on. We have collected everything, and that is how we think of a past, a present, and a future. It's all due to what we call memory. We are able to remember these activities. So when we say we are recalling the past, what we are really doing is we are repeating some activity that went on earlier. We are reproducing the earlier activities, and that is how we have a thing called memory, or we think of a thing called past. And when we think of the future, we are only creating new images, and we think of it as a future. This is why the past is only a memory and the future is only imagination. The only thing that we can talk about is present. But the present is also changing all the time. Every second it is a new thing. So this is why we can't even say that we are existing. So when we begin to realize this, that we are not even existing, then we begin to realize that there is no such thing as a self here. Self is a creation of the mind. So when we understand that properly, we awaken from the dream of existence. This is how we awaken from the dream of existence. That awakening from the dream of existence is what is called becoming a Buddha. A Buddha is the awakened one who has awakened from the dream of existence. But in this process of awakening, we have to understand that this idea of self is not only a logical or rational thought. It is the result of emotion. And when our mind is free of emotions, that feeling of self disappears. Because the feeling of self disappears, and we begin to see that there is no self here. So we become aware of the fact that there is no self to talk about. And if there is no self to talk about, we cannot be born, we cannot be growing old, we cannot be dying, because there is no one to die. We begin to realize that we have only been personalizing the body emotionally. That emotional personalization of the body and this thing called the mind, that we have come into existence as a self. And when we understand this properly, in the absence of the emotions, we are fully convinced that there is no self here. And this is how we awaken from the dream of existence. Once we awaken from this dream, there is the complete paradigm shift, which is a shift from existence to experience. The experience which is going on every moment as a new experience. And there is no self to talk about. Therefore, there is no real existence here, either subjective or objective. There is only an experience that is going on, which is an activity like a flame. A flame is an activity, not an entity. So there is no entity to refer to as the self or even the world. Everything is a product of this process of perception. So when we have realized this, we have awakened from the dream of existence, and we are free from all suffering. And the mind is stilled without being disturbed again. That is what the Buddha called Apuppa Ceto Vimukti. The imperturbable serenity of mind. The imperturbable serenity of mind. Nirvana. Nir means non, vana means shaking. The non-shaking of the mind. So when we talk about these four things, Samvara, Pahana, Bhavana and Anurakkhana. Samvara means guarding the senses. Prahana means to take our attention away from memories. Bhavana is the cultivation of this introversion of attention that results in becoming fully aware of the unconscious reaction, becoming conscious of the unconscious process, when the unconscious process comes to a stop, and thereby the willpower is gained and the mind gets purified, and with the purity of mind the paradigm shift occurs from existence to experience. And to keep on maintaining this introversion of attention is the maintenance which is called anurakkhana. So the maintenance goes on. Now I think we have said enough. You have understood how you can become a Buddha. And these are the steps to awakening. We just went through the steps to awakening. And we went through the sublime eightfold way, and we should also understand that there are 4 steps in the awakening process. The first is becoming a stream entrant, which is to complete the first 5 steps in the sublime eightfold way. You become a sotapanna, the stream entrant. Then the second is anagami. Sakadagami, which means the once returner. This means you have purified the mind, but still you can get polluted. And so, that's the second level. That is, if you do very good guarding the senses and withdrawing attention from memories. And then, when you begin to practice the cultivation and maintenance, then you can become an anagama, non-returner, which is a person who never returns to the sensual sphere. And of course, when there are these 2 fetters, kama, raga and patika, when these 2 fetters means the lust for pleasure and hatred. When these things disappear completely, you become an anagami. And then there are further 5 steps where the desire for mental images and the desire for absence of mental images, which is arupa. So those attachments have to disappear, and the mana, the feeling of self, and any excitement, agitation, and also the complete eradication of unconsciousness, avijja. When all that disappears, you become an arahant, a breaker of bonds. Arahant is complete breaker of bonds. And that is what Buddha has become and what the disciples who have reached perfection have become. That is awakening from the dream of existence. So that is the end of our discussion, and if you have any questions,
Nante, you wrote previously the technique of calming thoughts, Pitaka Santana Sutta.
yeah.
So this one come under Ahana, the 5 technique.
This is
Under
Prahana, yeah, it's partly Prahana, and of course towards the end it talks about the end of everything, huh?
yes.